The California sun beat down mercilessly as Detective Maria Santos pulled into the dusty parking lot of Golden State Storage. The facility stretched across several acres, row upon row of metal units that held the forgotten memories and abandoned dreams of countless people. Today, however, she wasn't here for a routine investigation. Today, she was about to uncover something that would shake the very foundations of what the world thought they knew about Meghan Markle. The call had come in 3 days earlier. A storage unit rented under a false name had gone unpaid for 6 months. When the facility manager finally cut the lock and prepared to auction off the contents, he discovered something that made him immediately contact the authorities. Inside Unit 247B, among boxes of what appeared to be personal belongings, were documents that seemed to tell a very different story about the Duchess of Sussex than the one the public knew. Maria adjusted her sunglasses and walked toward the facility office. She had been a detective for 15 years, working everything from petty theft to major fraud cases, but nothing had prepared her for this. The manager, a nervous man named Tom Bradley, had insisted on meeting her personally before opening the unit again. "Detective Santos?" Tom wiped sweat from his forehead as he approached. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I haven't slept since I found those things. I keep thinking about what this means, about what people will say." Tom led her through the maze of storage units, each one a small metal garage sealed with a roll-up door. The numbers climbed steadily until they reached the back corner of the facility, where Unit 247B sat slightly apart from the others. Maria noticed the lock had been replaced with a police seal. "Tell me again how you discovered this," Maria said, pulling out her notebook. Tom's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys. "The rent was 6 months overdue. We have a policy where we open units and inventory the contents before auction. Usually, it's just furniture, old clothes, maybe some photo albums. But this..." He gestured toward the unit. "This was different from the moment I rolled up that door." The lock clicked open, and Tom stepped back as if the unit might bite him. Maria took a deep breath and lifted the metal door. The screech of metal on metal echoed through the storage facility as afternoon light flooded the small space. At first glance, it looked like any other abandoned storage unit. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, some labeled in neat handwriting, others blank. A few pieces of furniture sat covered in dust sheets. But, as Maria's eyes adjusted to the dim interior, she began to notice details that made her pulse quicken. The boxes weren't random storage items. They were organized with military precision, each one labeled with dates and coded references. Along one wall, a bulletin board had been mounted, covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be timeline charts. Red string connected various points on the board, creating a web of connections that suggested someone had been conducting a serious investigation. "Have you touched anything since you first opened this?" Maria asked, pulling on latex gloves. "Only that first box," Tom pointed to a cardboard container near the entrance. "When I saw what was inside, I closed everything up and called you folks immediately." Maria approached the box Tom indicated. The lid had been carefully replaced, but she could see the tape had been cut. She lifted the cardboard flap and peered inside. Her breath caught in her throat. The box contained hundreds of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. The photographs showed Meghan Markle in various locations, but these weren't the polished images the public was used to seeing. These were candid shots, taken from a distance, showing her in private moments that suggested someone had been following her for years. But it wasn't the surveillance photos that made Maria's hands tremble as she carefully lifted them from the box. It was the documents underneath. Birth certificates, medical records, school transcripts, and employment documents that told a story completely different from the official biography the world knew about the former actress turned Duchess. "Mr. Bradley," Maria said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need you to leave this area immediately. This is now an active crime scene, and I need to call for backup." Tom's face went pale. "Crime scene? What kind of crime?" Maria didn't answer immediately. She was still processing what she was seeing in the box. According to the documents in her hands, Meghan Markle wasn't who she claimed to be. The birth certificate showed a different name, a different birthplace, and parents who weren't Thomas Markle and Doria Ragland. The medical records suggested surgical procedures that would have completely altered her appearance. School records showed enrollment under a different identity entirely. "Just please step back, sir. I'll need you to remain available for questioning," but right now I need to secure this scene. As Tom retreated to a safe distance, Maria pulled out her phone and dialed her supervisor. Each item she uncovered in that first box raised more questions than answers. If these documents were real, they suggested that Meghan Markle had assumed a completely fabricated identity sometime in her early 20s. But why? And who was the real person behind the carefully constructed public image? The afternoon heat was becoming unbearable inside the metal storage unit, but Maria couldn't leave. Each box she opened revealed more pieces of an incredibly complex puzzle. Financial records showed large payments from unknown sources. Travel documents indicated trips to countries that had never been mentioned in any official biography. Communication records suggested contact with individuals whose names appeared on government watch lists. One box contained what appeared to be training materials. Not acting classes or etiquette lessons, but documents related to intelligence gathering, psychological manipulation, and deep cover identity maintenance. The papers were worn, as if they had been studied extensively, with handwritten notes in the margins that showed someone taking this material very seriously. Maria photographed everything meticulously before moving it. Each piece of evidence needed to be documented in its original position before being processed through proper channels. But, as she worked, her mind raced with the implications of what she was discovering. The bulletin board on the wall told its own story. Photographs of various royal family members were connected with string to newspaper headlines about family disputes, financial troubles, and political controversies. At the center of it all was a detailed timeline that seemed to chart Meghan's path from obscure actress to duchess, with notes suggesting each step had been carefully planned and executed over many years. But, perhaps most disturbing were the documents that suggested this wasn't a solo operation. Financial records showed payments to multiple individuals, some identified only by code names. Communication logs indicated regular contact with handlers or supervisors. Training schedules suggested ongoing skill development even after her marriage to Prince Harry. As the sun began to set over the California storage facility, Maria realized she had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple case of identity fraud. The evidence suggested an elaborate, long-term operation that had successfully placed an asset at the very heart of the British royal family. But, who was behind it? And, what was their ultimate goal? Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor, federal agents en route. Secure scene and await instructions. Maria looked around the storage unit one more time, knowing that once the federal authorities arrived, this case would likely be taken out of her hands. But, she also knew that what she had discovered here would change everything people thought they knew about one of the most famous women in the world. The question that haunted her as she waited for backup wasn't whether the documents were real. The level of detail, the consistency across multiple sources, and the physical evidence all pointed to authenticity. The question was what would happen when this information became public. How would the royal family react? How would the British government respond? And, most importantly, where was the real Meghan Markle, and what had happened to her? As darkness fell over the storage facility, Maria stood guard over a collection of boxes that contained enough explosive material to topple governments and destroy lives. She had started the day thinking she was investigating a simple case of abandoned property. Instead, she had uncovered what appeared to be one of the most sophisticated deception operations in modern history. The sound of approaching sirens told her that her quiet investigation was about to become something much larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The truth had been found, and now it demanded to be told, regardless of the consequences. In the distance, Tom Bradley watched from his office window as federal vehicles began arriving at his storage facility. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had opened something that should have stayed closed forever. The normal sounds of the evening traffic seemed muted, as if the very air around the facility had changed. Whatever was in Unit 247B had the power to change history itself. As Maria prepared to hand over the evidence to federal authorities, she made one final walk through the storage unit. Each box represented years of careful planning and execution. Each document told part of a story that challenged everything the public believed about truth, identity, and the power of deception when executed on a global scale. The implications were staggering. If Meghan Markle was indeed someone else entirely, then her marriage to Prince Harry wasn't just a fairy tale romance. It was a successful infiltration of one of the world's oldest and most powerful institutions. And, if that was true, then everything that had followed, from their departure from royal duties to their relocation to California, took on an entirely different meaning. Maria locked the storage unit one final time, knowing she would probably never see its contents again. Federal agents would take over from here, and the investigation would disappear into the shadowy world of national security and international relations. But she would always remember this day, when she had stumbled upon a truth so profound and disturbing that it challenged the very notion of reality itself. The California storage facility returned to its normal quiet routine, but Unit 247B now held secrets that could reshape the modern world. Whatever happened next, the discovery made on this hot afternoon would be remembered as the moment when carefully constructed illusions began to crumble, revealing truths that some people would kill to keep hidden. Federal agent Sarah Chen arrived at the Golden State Storage Facility just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the California hills. She had received the emergency briefing during her flight from Washington, D.C., but nothing had prepared her for the magnitude of what Detective Santos had discovered. As she stepped out of the black SUV, she could feel the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. Agent Chen had spent 12 years working in counterintelligence, investigating foreign operatives and domestic threats to national security. She had seen elaborate spy networks, deep cover operations, and sophisticated deception campaigns. But the preliminary reports from Unit 247B suggested something that went beyond traditional espionage into uncharted territory. Detective Santos? Sarah approached the tired-looking local investigator who had been guarding the storage unit for hours. I'm Agent Chen, FBI Counterintelligence Division. I understand you've made quite a discovery here. Maria nodded grimly. Agent Chen, I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Whatever operation we're dealing with, it's been running for decades, and it's been successful beyond anything I thought was possible. As they walked toward Unit 247B, Sarah's mind processed the implications. If the preliminary reports were accurate, they were dealing with an identity replacement operation that had successfully placed an asset within the British royal family. The international ramifications alone were staggering. Have you had any contact with British intelligence services? Sarah asked as Maria unlocked the storage unit. Not yet. My supervisor wanted federal review first. But, Agent Chen, when you see what's in here, you'll understand why we needed to be careful about who we contact and when. The storage unit door rolled up, revealing the carefully organized collection of evidence that had shaken Detective Santos to her core. Agent Chen stepped inside and immediately understood why this discovery had triggered such a high-level response. The level of organization and documentation suggested this wasn't the work of a blackmailer or conspiracy theorist. This was a professional intelligence operation archive. Sarah moved methodically through the storage unit, photographing and cataloging each piece of evidence. The first box confirmed her worst fears. The documents weren't forgeries or fantasies. They bore all the hallmarks of authentic intelligence materials, proper classification markings, consistent paper types and printing methods that corresponded to the alleged time periods, and a level of detail that would have been impossible to fake convincingly. The birth certificate in the first box showed that the person the world knew as Meghan Markle had been born as Sarah Michelle Chen in Vancouver, Canada, not Rachel Meghan Markle in Los Angeles. The irony of the name's similarity to her own wasn't lost on Agent Chen as she carefully examined the document. The birth parents listed were not Thomas Markle and Doria Ragland, but individuals whose names appeared nowhere in public records related to the Duchess. Medical records in the same box detailed extensive plastic surgery performed in Switzerland between 2003 and 2005. The procedures were far beyond cosmetic enhancement. They represented a complete facial reconstruction designed to create a new identity. Before and after photographs showed a transformation so complete that the original person would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known her before the surgeries. But it was the training records that made Agent Chen's blood run cold. Detailed curricula showed years of intensive preparation in accent modification, cultural immersion, acting techniques, and what could only be described as social manipulation training. The person who emerged from this program wouldn't just look different, she would be a completely different person with the skills to convince anyone of her new identity. Detective, did you find any indication of who was running this operation? Sarah asked as she carefully packed the medical records into evidence containers. Maria shook her head. That's what worries me. The financial records show payments from shell companies that lead nowhere. The communication logs use code names and encrypted references. Whoever organized this operation knows how to stay hidden. Agent Chen continued her investigation, moving to the boxes that contained what appeared to be mission planning documents. These files detailed a long-term strategy for gaining access to high-profile social circles, with particular emphasis on entertainment industry connections and British social networks. The level of detail was extraordinary, including psychological profiles of potential targets and strategic assessments of various relationship opportunities. One file contained detailed intelligence on Prince Harry, compiled years before the public was aware that he and Meghan had ever met. The file included psychological analysis, personal history, relationship patterns, and what appeared to be vulnerability assessments. Someone had studied the prince exhaustively and had developed a comprehensive strategy for gaining his attention and affection. This wasn't a chance meeting, Agent Chen muttered as she read through the Harry file. Every aspect of their relationship was planned and executed according to a strategic timeline. The timeline charts on the bulletin board told the story of a decade-long operation. Beginning in 2005, shortly after the surgical transformation, the newly created Meghan Markle had systematically built a public identity as an actress. Small roles, carefully cultivated relationships, and strategic career moves had created a plausible background that would stand up to casual scrutiny. The operation had moved into its active phase around 2015, when Meghan began the careful process of positioning herself to meet Prince Harry. Social connections were cultivated, charity work was strategically selected, and media relationships were developed. Nothing was left to chance. Agent Chen found herself impressed despite the horrifying implications. The level of patience and precision required to execute such an operation was extraordinary. Most intelligence operations focused on short-term objectives. This one had required years of careful preparation followed by years of careful execution, all while maintaining perfect cover. The communication records revealed the truly chilling aspect of the operation. Even after her marriage to Prince Harry, the asset had continued to receive guidance and instructions from her handlers. Regular coded communications suggested ongoing mission objectives that extended far beyond simply gaining access to the royal family. Detective Santos, Agent Chen called out, "Did you find any indication of what the ultimate objective was? What were they trying to accomplish beyond infiltrating the royal family?" Maria joined her at a box containing what appeared to be operational plans and target assessments. "That's where it gets really disturbing, Agent Chen. Based on these documents, the marriage was just the beginning. The real objective seems to have been destabilizing the monarchy itself." The operational plans laid out a systematic strategy for creating conflict within the royal family, generating negative media coverage, and ultimately undermining public support for the institution. The departure from royal duties hadn't been an emotional reaction to media pressure, it had been a planned phase of the operation designed to maximize damage to the crown's reputation. Agent Chen studied the psychological warfare documents with growing alarm. The operation had anticipated and planned for every aspect of the public drama that had unfolded over the past several years. Media strategies, interview talking points, and even the timing of major revelations had been carefully orchestrated to achieve maximum impact. Who benefits from destabilizing the British monarchy? Agent Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Maria pointed to a series of financial documents that tracked payments to various anti-monarchist organizations and Republican political groups. "Someone's been funding opposition movements for years, Agent Chen. This operation wasn't just about gathering intelligence or gaining access. It was about actively working to bring down one of the world's oldest institutions." The implications were staggering. If the operation had been successful, it would represent one of the most devastating intelligence victories in modern history. A foreign power had successfully placed an asset at the heart of the British establishment and used that position to attack the monarchy from within. As Agent Chen continued her investigation, she discovered evidence that the operation was still active. Recent communications suggested ongoing objectives related to media manipulation and political influence in both the United Kingdom and the United States. The relocation to California hadn't been an escape from royal duties, it had been a strategic repositioning to execute the next phase of the mission. "Detective, we need to contact British intelligence immediately," Agent Chen said, her voice tight with urgency. "If this operation is still active, they need to know what they're dealing with." But, even as she spoke, Agent Chen realized the complexity of the situation. How do you tell one of your closest allies that their royal family has been successfully infiltrated by a foreign intelligence operation? How do you explain that one of the most watched women in the world is actually a deep cover operative who has been working to destroy the institution she married into? The storage unit contained enough evidence to prove the operation's existence, but it also raised questions about how to respond. Exposing the truth would cause an international incident of unprecedented proportions. But allowing the operation to continue could result in the complete destruction of the British monarchy. Agent Chen made the difficult decision to immediately classify all evidence under the highest levels of national security protection. Whatever decisions were made about how to handle this situation, they would need to be made at the highest levels of government, with careful consideration of the international implications. As she sealed the last evidence container, Agent Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they had uncovered something that would change the course of history. The carefully planned operation had succeeded beyond its creator's wildest dreams, infiltrating not just the royal family but the hearts and minds of millions of people around the world. The storage unit that had seemed like a routine abandoned property case just hours earlier had revealed itself to be the archive of one of the most successful espionage operations ever conducted. The question now wasn't whether the operation had succeeded, but how the world would respond when the truth inevitably came to light. Detective Santos watched as federal agents loaded the evidence containers into secure transport vehicles. She had stumbled upon a secret that governments would kill to protect and others would die to expose. The quiet storage facility would return to normal operations, but the secrets that had been hidden in Unit 247B would reshape international relations for generations to come. As the convoy of federal vehicles disappeared into the California night, the only evidence of the day's discoveries was a small piece of police tape that had fallen near the storage unit door. Even that would be gone by morning, swept away by the desert wind, leaving no trace of the moment when one of history's greatest deceptions had finally been exposed. The secure conference room in the federal building in Los Angeles had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Representatives from the FBI, CIA, NSA, and British intelligence service MI6 sat around a polished mahogany table, studying documents that would normally take weeks of diplomatic negotiations to share. But the evidence from Unit 247B had shattered normal protocols and demanded immediate international cooperation. Agent Chen placed the final evidence folder on the table as the last participant arrived. Sir James Worthington from MI6 looked exactly like what central casting would order for a British intelligence officer, impeccably dressed, silver-haired, and possessing the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he had seen everything the world of espionage could offer. His presence indicated that London was taking this situation very seriously indeed. "Gentlemen, ladies," Agent Chen began, "what we discovered in that storage unit yesterday represents the most successful long-term intelligence penetration in modern history. Before we proceed, I need to emphasize that nothing discussed in this room can leave this room without explicit authorization from the highest levels of government." CIA Director Patricia Williams leaned forward. "Agent Chen, we've all reviewed your preliminary reports. The implications are staggering, but we need to verify authenticity before we can determine our response. Are we absolutely certain these documents are genuine?" Agent Chen nodded grimly. "Our forensic analysis is ongoing, but preliminary tests confirm authenticity. Paper composition, ink analysis, printing methods, and aging patterns all correspond to the alleged dates. More importantly, we've been able to independently verify several key pieces of information through classified databases." Sir James spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of British diplomatic tradition. "Agent Chen, you must understand the delicacy of this situation. The individual in question is not just a member of the royal family, she's the mother of children who are in line for the throne. The implications extend far beyond intelligence concerns into constitutional crisis territory." NSA Deputy Director Michael Torres spread several photographs across the table. "Sir James, with all due respect, the constitutional implications may be the least of our concerns. The communication intercepts we've been reviewing suggest this operation is still active and may be expanding its objectives." The photographs showed intercepted communications between various individuals using the same code systems found in the storage unit. The messages, when decoded, reveal ongoing operational planning that extended far beyond the original mission parameters. What had begun as an infiltration operation had evolved into something much more ambitious and dangerous. The original mission was clearly focused on the royal family, Agent Chen explained, pointing to a timeline chart. But these recent communications suggest the operation has expanded to include political influence campaigns in both the UK and the United States. They're not just trying to damage the monarchy, they're trying to reshape the political landscape of both countries. FBI Assistant Director Robert Kane studied a financial document with growing concern. The funding for this operation is extraordinary. We're tracking money flows through dozens of shell companies across multiple countries. Someone has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this operation over more than a decade. Sir James examined the same financial records with professional interest. These payment structures are familiar. We've seen similar patterns in operations attributed to state actors with significant resources and long-term strategic objectives. This isn't the work of a criminal organization or terrorist group. This is nation-state level intelligence warfare. The revelation that they were dealing with a state-sponsored operation changed the entire dynamic of the meeting. Criminal operations could be prosecuted through normal legal channels. Terrorist activities could be addressed through established counter-terrorism protocols. But an active intelligence operation by a foreign nation against the British Crown represented an act of war. CIA Director Williams pulled out a classified assessment that had been prepared overnight. Our initial analysis suggests 3 possible state sponsors with the motivation and resources to execute an operation of this magnitude. The targeting of both the UK and US political systems narrows the field considerably. Agent Chen had spent the night reviewing every piece of evidence from the storage unit, looking for clues about the operation's sponsors. The training materials provide some indication of origin. The psychological manipulation techniques are consistent with methodologies developed by the former Soviet intelligence services, but adapted and modernized. The technological components suggest resources available only to major powers. Sir James set down a classified file he had been reviewing. I'm authorized to share certain intelligence with this group under current emergency protocols. MI5 and MI6 have been tracking unusual patterns of political influence operations targeting British institutions for several years. We identified foreign funding for various anti-monarchist groups, but we never connected these activities to the royal family infiltration. The scope of the operation was becoming clearer as intelligence from multiple agencies was shared and compared. The marriage to Prince Harry hadn't been the end goal. It had been a means to achieve much larger objectives. The systematic undermining of public confidence in the monarchy, the promotion of Republican political movements, and the amplification of social divisions had all been part of a coordinated campaign. The psychological warfare component is particularly sophisticated, NSA Deputy Director Torres observed. They haven't just planted an asset, they've created a narrative that resonates with existing social tensions. The racism allegations, the mental health claims, the media victimization story, it's all designed to exploit fault lines that were already present in British and American society. Agent Chen pulled up a series of media analysis charts on the conference room's digital display. Our preliminary review of media coverage shows clear patterns of coordinated messaging. Stories appear simultaneously across multiple platforms, using similar language and focusing on specific themes. This isn't organic media coverage, it's a sophisticated influence campaign. The media manipulation aspect of the operation was perhaps its most brilliant component. Rather than trying to control information directly, the operators had created narratives that the media willingly amplified. Stories about racism, family dysfunction, and institutional cruelty had been carefully crafted to generate maximum emotional response and social division. FBI Assistant Director Kane pointed to a series of communication intercepts. The operation has been adapting in real time based on public response. When certain narratives gained traction, the operators doubled down with additional supporting materials. When stories failed to achieve desired impact, they were quietly abandoned in favor of new approaches. Sir James studied the media analysis with growing alarm. The damage to the monarchy's reputation has been severe, but we assumed it was the result of legitimate criticism and public relations missteps. If this has been a coordinated attack using planted assets and manipulated narratives, then the entire crisis takes on a different character. The implications extended beyond the royal family to the fundamental relationship between the United Kingdom and its people. If public opinion had been systematically manipulated by foreign intelligence services, then the legitimacy of democratic discourse itself was under attack. CIA Director Williams raised the question that everyone in the room was thinking but no one wanted to voice. How do we respond to this? How do you counter an operation that has been successful for more than a decade and has fundamentally altered public perceptions? The challenge was unprecedented. Traditional counterintelligence operations focused on identifying and neutralizing foreign agents. But, this operation had succeeded so completely that the agent was now a global celebrity with millions of supporters who genuinely believed in her cause. Exposing the truth would be seen by many as an attack on someone they viewed as a victim of institutional racism and media persecution. Agent Chen had been struggling with this question since discovering the storage unit. Any direct action risks creating a martyr and, actually advancing the operation's objectives. If we expose the truth clumsily, it could generate even more anti-monarchist sentiment and social division. Sir James nodded gravely. The operational planners were brilliant in their choice of target and methodology. They've created a situation where the truth itself becomes a weapon that can be used against us. How do you prove that someone's entire life story is a fabrication without appearing to be engaged in a conspiracy to destroy them? NSA Deputy Director Torres pulled up communication intercepts that showed the operators were already prepared for potential exposure. They've anticipated this scenario and have prepared counter-narratives about government persecution, racist institutions attempting to silence criticism, and powerful forces trying to destroy truth-tellers. Even exposure could serve their objectives. The meeting continued deep into the night as intelligence professionals from both sides of the Atlantic grappled with a situation unlike anything in their experience. They had uncovered evidence of the most successful intelligence operation in modern history, but they had also discovered that their enemy had prepared for this moment and was ready to turn their victory into an even greater triumph. FBI Assistant Director Kane summarized the challenge they faced. We're dealing with an operation that succeeds whether it remains hidden or gets exposed. If it stays secret, it continues to damage our institutions from within. If we reveal it, we risk triggering the very social upheaval it was designed to create. As dawn approached over Los Angeles, the assembled intelligence professionals realized they were facing more than just a counterintelligence challenge. They were confronting a new form of warfare that attacked the foundation of democratic societies by undermining the shared understanding of truth itself. The storage unit discovery had revealed the existence of the operation, but it had also shown them that their enemies were several moves ahead in a game whose rules were still being written. Whatever response they chose would need to be as sophisticated and long-term as the operation they were trying to counter. Sir James looked around the room at his American counterparts with newfound respect for the complexity of the challenge they all faced. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're witnessing the evolution of warfare itself. The question is whether our institutions can adapt quickly enough to survive. 6 months after the discovery at Golden State Storage, the reverberations of what had been found in Unit 247B continued to reshape intelligence operations on both sides of the Atlantic. Agent Sarah Chen sat in her Washington, D.C. office, reviewing the final classified assessment of what had become known as Operation Royal Deception. The investigation had uncovered layers of complexity that went far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The forensic analysis of the storage unit contents had confirmed everyone's worst fears. Every document was authentic. Every photograph was real. Every piece of evidence pointed to a decade-long intelligence operation that had successfully placed a deep-cover operative at the very heart of the British royal family. But, the investigation had also revealed something even more disturbing. This was not an isolated operation. Agent Chen opened the thick file that contained the results of the global investigation that had followed the California discovery. Intelligence services from 14 countries had quietly shared information, revealing a pattern of similar operations targeting royal families, political leaders, and cultural institutions across the Western world. The Meghan Markle operation wasn't unique, it was part of a coordinated campaign of unprecedented scope and ambition. The scale is breathtaking, she murmured to herself as she reviewed the summary reports. Operations had been identified targeting the Swedish royal family, Norwegian political leadership, Canadian cultural institutions, and Australian media organizations. Each operation followed the same pattern: long-term identity construction, surgical transformation when necessary, years of careful positioning, and systematic infiltration of target institutions. The phone on her desk rang, interrupting her review. Sir James Worthington's voice came through the secure line from London. Agent Chen, I trust you've received the final assessment reports? Yes, Sir James. I've been reviewing them all morning. The implications are staggering. We're not just dealing with a single operation, we're looking at a coordinated assault on Western democratic institutions that's been running for decades. Indeed, Sir James replied, his voice heavy with the weight of what they had discovered. The question that keeps me awake at night is how many operations we haven't discovered yet. If they were successful enough to place assets in the British royal family, where else might they have succeeded? That question had been haunting intelligence professionals across the Western world for months. The discovery of the Meghan operation had triggered a massive review of other high-profile relationships, marriages, and appointments that had shaped political and cultural landscapes over the past 2 decades. The preliminary results were deeply disturbing. Agent Chen pulled up a classified database on her computer screen. Sir James, our review of other potential operations has identified at least 37 cases that show similar patterns. We have possible assets in political parties, media organizations, cultural institutions, and even other royal households. The scope of this campaign may be larger than anything we've faced since the Cold War. The investigation had revealed the true genius of the operations planners. Rather than focusing solely on traditional intelligence gathering, they had recognized that in the modern world, cultural influence was often more powerful than military force. By placing assets in positions where they could shape public opinion, social movements, and political narratives, the operators had found a way to attack democratic societies from within. The psychological warfare component continues to evolve, Sir James noted. Even months after our discovery, the media narratives established by the operation continue to influence public opinion. The damage to the monarchy's reputation persists, and anti-institutional sentiment continues to grow. This was perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the situation for the intelligence professionals involved in the investigation. Even though they now understood that public opinion had been systematically manipulated through false narratives and planted stories, they could not simply reverse the damage by revealing the truth. The operation had been so successful that the fabricated reality had become accepted truth for millions of people. Agent Chen had spent considerable time studying the psychological aspects of the operation. The operators understood something fundamental about modern information warfare, Sir James. They realized that in the age of social media and instant communication, perception becomes reality very quickly. Once a narrative is established and emotionally resonated with large groups of people, it becomes extremely difficult to dislodge, even with contradictory evidence. The Meghan operation had demonstrated this principle perfectly. Stories about racism, institutional cruelty, and media persecution had been carefully crafted to trigger emotional responses that overwhelmed rational analysis. People had invested their emotions in supporting someone they saw as a victim fighting against powerful oppressive forces. Learning that the entire narrative was fabricated would require them to admit they had been manipulated, which most people were psychologically unwilling to do. Our psychological analysis suggests that even if we were to reveal the truth publicly, a significant portion of the population would reject the evidence as part of the conspiracy they've been trained to believe in, Agent Chen continued. The operation has created a self-reinforcing narrative that protects itself against exposure. Sir James sighed audibly over the secure connection. Which brings us to the fundamental question we've been wrestling with for months: how do we respond? Traditional counterintelligence methods are inadequate for this situation. This had become the central challenge for intelligence services on both sides of the Atlantic. Every potential response carried significant risks. Exposure could trigger the very social upheaval the operation was designed to create. Continued secrecy allowed the operation to continue achieving its objectives. Direct action against the assets could create martyrs and amplify the narratives they had been spreading. Agent Chen had been working with a multinational task force to develop response options. We've identified several potential approaches, but none of them are without significant risks. The most promising strategy involves a long-term counter-operation designed to gradually discredit the false narratives without directly exposing the assets. The counter-operation strategy was based on the same principles the original operators had used: gradual influence, emotional narrative construction, and systematic manipulation of public opinion. But, instead of promoting anti-institutional sentiment, the counter-operation would work to restore confidence in democratic institutions and traditional alliances. The irony is not lost on me, Sir James observed, that countering this deception operation requires us to engage in our own form of information manipulation. We find ourselves having to fight lies with carefully constructed truth, propaganda with counter-propaganda. This ethical dilemma had troubled many of the professionals involved in developing response strategies. Using the same psychological manipulation techniques that had been used against them felt like a betrayal of the democratic values they were trying to protect. But, the alternative might be allowing hostile foreign powers to continue destroying Western institutions from within. Agent Chen reviewed the operational timeline that had been developed for the counter-strategy. The plan calls for a 5-year campaign to gradually shift public narratives back toward institutional support while simultaneously exposing the broader pattern of foreign influence operations. The goal is to inoculate the public against future manipulation while undoing the damage from past operations. The counter-operation would require unprecedented cooperation between intelligence services, media organizations, academic institutions, and cultural leaders. It would involve carefully orchestrated revelations, strategic leaks, investigative journalism, and academic research that would gradually build a new understanding of how democratic societies had been systematically attacked through cultural infiltration. Sir James, there's one more aspect of this situation that I think we need to discuss, Agent Chen said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Our investigation has identified the probable masterminds behind these operations, but we haven't yet determined how to respond to them directly. The evidence pointed to a coordinated campaign directed by intelligence services from a major power that had recognized the vulnerability of open democratic societies to this form of attack. Traditional diplomatic and economic responses seemed inadequate given the success of the operations and their ongoing impact. The challenge, Sir James replied, is that these operations exist in a gray area between traditional espionage and acts of war. They've attacked our institutions and our societies, but not in ways that justify conventional military responses. Agent Chen had been studying historical precedents for months, looking for guidance on how to respond to this new form of warfare. The closest analogy might be the propaganda and influence campaigns of the Cold War era, but even those pale in comparison to the sophistication and success of what we're dealing with now. The conversation continued for another hour as the two intelligence professionals grappled with challenges that had no clear precedents in their training or experience. They were dealing with an enemy that had successfully weaponized the openness and freedom of democratic societies against themselves. As Agent Chen prepared to end the call, Sir James made one final observation that would stay with her for months to come. Agent Chen, I believe we're witnessing the emergence of a new form of warfare that attacks the epistemological foundations of democratic society. They're not just trying to influence our policies or steal our secrets, they're trying to destroy our ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood. After ending the call, Agent Chen sat alone in her office, contemplating the massive file of evidence that represented one of the most successful intelligence operations in modern history. The storage unit discovery had revealed not just a single deception, but an entire system of deception that challenged the fundamental assumptions of how democratic societies operated. The investigation would continue, the counter-operations would be implemented, and the long process of rebuilding institutional trust would begin. But Agent Chen knew that the world had been permanently changed by what they had discovered. The age of information warfare had arrived, and Western democracies were still learning how to defend themselves against enemies who understood the power of truth and lies better than their victims did. Outside her window, Washington, D.C. continued its normal rhythm of government and politics, unaware that the fundamental nature of conflict between nations had evolved while they weren't watching. The storage unit in California had contained more than just evidence of deception, it had revealed a new form of war that was already being waged against the very foundations of free society. The question that would define the coming decades was whether democratic institutions could adapt quickly enough to survive this new battlefield where the weapons were narratives, the targets were minds, and the victory conditions involved the complete transformation of how entire societies understood reality itself. As Agent Chen locked the classified files in her secure safe, she couldn't shake the feeling that the discovery at Golden State Storage had been just the beginning. Somewhere, in storage units and safe houses and hidden archives around the world, other revelations waited to be discovered. The truth was out there, but so were the lies, and telling the difference was becoming harder every day.